Order. Please rise.
Good evening, everyone. We will start the meeting off with a prayer. We beseech thee, Lord, to bestow wisdom upon the members of this council in order that their decisions may be founded on justice and prudence. Amen. Please be seated.
Your Worship, I'll move concurrence in the agenda for tonight's meeting.
I'll second that, Your Worship.
Thank you. Discussion. Call for the question. All those in favor? Against? That is carried.
And I'll move the minutes for the last meeting.
Thank you.
I'll second those minutes.
Thank you. Discussion. Call for the question. All those in favor? Against? That's carried. Madam Clerk, I'm going to turn it over to you because I think there's some unfinished business.
There is, Your Worship. The first item that is actually on the agenda is CR 12-120, which is the Housing Amendment Incentive Policy, and this report was tabled at the last meeting, so we will need a mover to bring this one forward.
Thank you. If I can have a mover. Thank you, Councillor Clipsham. Seconder.
Second that, Your Worship.
Thank you. Discussion. Call for the question. All those in favor? Against? That's carried. Back to you, Madam Clerk, because we have some unfinished business on the third reading.
We do, Your Worship. As we were finalizing our minutes, we recognized that while we had a motion on the floor to give third readings to these bylaws, we didn't, in fact, call the question. So the motion on the floor was moved by Councillor Brown, seconded by Councillor Findura, and it was that bylaws 2012-41, 58, 59, 60, 63, and 65 be read a third time.
And I will call for the question. All those in favor? Against? That is carried. We will now move on to our delegations, starting with, bear with me here. We got 21 first. Sorry, my mistake. CR 12-121. Oh, yes, you're right. Sorry, we'll start with dash 1271, Miss Susan Burley. Welcome to City Council. We ask that you state your name and which organization you represent, if any, for the record. And you have up to 10 minutes to make your presentation, and we ask that you follow the brief you provided the clerk's office.
Thank you. My name is Susan Burley, and I'm representing myself. I'm a resident of Ward 3, and I'm running for council to represent Ward 3 in the upcoming municipal election. I'd like to submit the following for consideration in the discussion on the Regina Downtown Neighbourhood Plan and the amendments to Regina Development Plan Bylaw number 7877 and Regina Zoning Bylaw 9250. First, I'd like to commend Council for commissioning the Consultant's Office for Urbanism, who developed the Regina Downtown Neighbourhood Plan, Walk to Work. This is a very comprehensive study which explores many new concepts in contemporary urban planning and reflects the input of many Regina residents through a comprehensive public consultation process. If implemented, it will provide a template and a guide for Regina's downtown development that will revitalize it and create the blueprint for a 21st century city. The Downtown Neighbourhood Plan, once implemented through the official community plan, and the development of design standards will provide tools for Regina's downtown future growth and development. It recommends actions that will contribute to building the employment base and stimulate economic development that will attract new residents, entrepreneurs, and investment. In addition, the plan will build on the recommendations of the many citizens who contributed creative ideas and vision for a complete, livable community in the downtown. A community that is connected, is friendly and accessible to walkers and cyclists, has efficient public transit, is a hub for creative enterprise, provides a range of housing options for all income levels, respects the heritage assets of downtown, includes a diverse population, has pedestrian-friendly facades, and places to gather and celebrate. These are wonderful goals to aspire towards. I'd like to strongly emphasize the need for Council to not only adopt the plan as presented, but also to develop an implementation plan as soon as possible. This includes allocating sufficient resources to ensure that the revitalization of Regina's downtown takes precedence over other projects that have not been part of a comprehensive public consultation process. One question I have is why it took Council so long to adopt the Downtown Neighborhood Plan. It was approved in 2009, yet it's taken 3 years to come forward. In particular, I'm concerned that Council develop and approve an implementation strategy that will ensure that the concepts proposed are followed through on before other projects of Council take precedence. I'd also like to draw your attention to the development that has taken place under an aspect of the Downtown Neighborhood Plan, the former WOW project that resulted in the plaza. I'd like to refer you to bylaw number 9656, a bylaw of the City of Regina to designate an area of the city surrounding Victoria Park as a municipal heritage conservation district. The bylaw includes guidelines for heritage, which are also referenced in the Downtown Neighborhood Plan. I include the following section, and quote, "The objectives of these guidelines are to, number one, preserve and promote the distinctive heritage and character of the areas surrounding Victoria Park and the Scar Street Mall by facilitating the rehabilitation of the predominantly pre-World War I heritage buildings and encouraging the redevelopment of properties in keeping with the character of the adjacent heritage buildings. And number two, enhance the streetscapes of the Victoria Park area with regard to landscape, lighting, and signage to create a pedestrian-oriented environment. Guidelines are established for the alteration and maintenance of existing properties, including buildings, structures, and landscapes. New development shall be complete with the established heritage character of its immediate surroundings and the Victoria Park in general. In particular, I want to draw your attention to the following provision in the guidelines under number 4.5, landscaping and lighting, and I'll just highlight landscaping of the Scar Street Mall and 1900 block of Scar Street shall be as per the revitalization plans previously approved by Council. Landscaping in the design plan of Victoria Park shall be as per the intent of the Victoria Park Master Plan previously approved by Council. And 4.5.3, new street furniture, including light standards, benches, garbage receptacles, and transit shelters, shall be designated to complement the heritage character of the Heritage Conservation District. And when required, new street lighting shall be located to enhance the pedestrian environment. Considering that the bylaw clearly states that new street furniture shall be designed to complement the heritage character of the Heritage Conservation District, I wonder how a decision was made in awarding a contract to Kohlmeyer Architects for the implementation of the WOW project, which resulted in the plaza, since it does not in any way resemble the heritage character of the Conservation District. It seems that Council either deliberately or unconsciously chose to ignore its own bylaw in the granting of the contract, which also went over budget by approximately $10 million. I would like some clarification on how this decision was arrived at. Other than that, I'd like to emphasize the need to move quickly on implementation of the Downtown Neighborhood Plan. Thank you for the opportunity to present.
Thank you for your presentation. Are there any questions of Ms. Burley? Seeing none, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Our next delegation, DE 12-72, Burl Forgay or Forget? Forgay, thank you. Sorry about that. Welcome to City Council. We ask that you state your name and which organization you represent, if any, for the record. You have up to 10 minutes to make your presentation, which I don't think it will take based on what you've submitted to the clerk's office.
My name is Burl Forgay, and I'm here as a taxpayer. I've been paying taxes for 44 years in this city on my property. And I have two submissions. I hope that's, I don't find that in the this list here, but they're both very short.
Okay.
As a taxpayer, I respectfully request the Council to consider the proposed size of buildings facing Victoria Park on Lorne Street. I understand that in the proposed rezoning, the size for the block containing the present Central Library is recommended to be a 5-story building at the front of the present library building and a 10-story building at the back. This clearly would change the ambience of the park. Aside from affecting the general appearance of the street, it would also limit sunlight. And it is certainly far more space than the library alone would require. Since the library is a public facility, it's very important that the Central Library not allow space to move into private business. Therefore, I respectfully request that the size of any building in the library lot be rezoned to 2 stories in the front, 3 to 4 stories at the back of the lot, and this would be enough to allow for any future enlargement of the building. I would also like to make a submission regarding bylaw 787 and bylaw 9250. I respectfully present these and ask that the Council peruse all present bylaws to be sure that no private or for-profit business be allowed to partner with the public library. The combination of public and private is an anachronism. It endangers the Regina public's freedom of access to the knowledge that the Central Public Library can provide for their benefit. By regulation of hours, for instance, regulation of hours of opening, a private partnership could endanger the freedom of the Central Public Library to provide wide level of service which the public citizens of Regina have a right to receive. Secondly, by a partner's regulation of space provided, the Central Public Library might have to curtail some programs which could benefit the public. And thirdly, by tying up library tax money in an overly large building, public funds could be diverted from their essential use for the Central Library. Therefore, I request that under no circumstances should this combination of private-public partnership be considered for the public library by the wording of any bylaw concerning the library. Thank you very much for allowing me to make this presentation. And if there are any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them.
Thank you for your presentation. Are there any questions of our delegation? Seeing none, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Our next delegation, DE 12-73, Jeannie Ma. Welcome to City Council. We ask that you state your name and which organization you represent, if any, for the record. You have up to 10 minutes to make your presentation, and we ask that you follow the brief you provided the clerk's office.
Hi, my name is Jeannie Ma, and I'm speaking as a citizen of Regina. And I prepared something with a bunch of images to go along with my talk, and for some reason I think there's a bylaw that doesn't allow images in the City Council, or it's technologically incompatible. Anyway, so I apologize to the people in the audience that they won't be able to see what the councillors are seeing. The Walk to Work consultation spoke of Victoria Park as the historical centre of our city. Jennifer Keesmaat reminded us that Regina had good bones, but to realize our full potential as a dynamic city, we should be careful to preserve what we have left of the existing city. We should not tear down any more historic buildings, as these give the city its texture and its personality. Because of the Frederick Todd and Thomas Mawson urban plans from the early 20th century, we already had a well-planned and compact city centre. But over the years, the dynamic downtown of my youth was eroded. Without firm civic heritage guidelines, department stores, banks, office buildings, hotels, cinemas, stately homes, a monastery, and apartments were torn down. Our once powerful downtown, with its great mercantile and cultural mix, was destroyed. When the new Walk to Work downtown plan was approved, Dr. Bill Brennan of Heritage Regina stressed that all historical buildings should be preserved, including great mid-century modernist architecture, such as the Azumi-designed Regina Public Library. The next thing on the agenda that evening was the approval to demolish the Plains Hotel. This went completely against the downtown plan, which stressed keeping all historical elements of downtown Regina. The new plans for Victoria Park were even more shocking. During the 3 sessions of consultations with Office for Urbanism, there was not a breath of an idea of cutting into Victoria Park. No mention was made of cutting down trees or of cutting an arc into our perfectly designed, symmetrically square Victoria Park with its charming meandering paths, some now gone. This is our only Victoria Park, designed by Frederick Todd, Canada's first resident landscape architect. Todd worked for Olmsted on New York Central Park, and he also designed the Plains of Abraham, parts of Mount Royal Park in Montreal, Toronto's Mount Pleasant Park, Assiniboine Park in Winnipeg, to name but a few, and our Victoria Park. Why am I shocked at this destruction? During the second phase of the consultations on April 8, 2008, Jennifer Keesmaat discussed the 8 big moves which could improve the city centre. To specifically address the issue of Victoria Park, or City Square, I'll quote from 2 points from Forum 2. Number 2, the City Square. Victoria Park is the City Square, the community living room of the downtown core. It's the starting point of the city. Every design move, every programmatic initiative builds on, and I would add, should not destroy, the geography of Victoria Park. Number 8, Festival Place. The transformed portion of 12th Avenue adjacent to Victoria Park will act as a new festival and market street that includes the width of the street and both sidewalks from the park edge to the building faces and will contribute to a renewed concept of the city square. The original plan from WOW to City Square to Walk to Work discussed repaving the street so that it would be safe to walk without tripping on broken sidewalks, and so the street could be easily converted. A good example is Place des Arts in Montreal. So people could come to festivals, sit in the sun or the shade, shop at the farmer's market, and enjoy our downtown and our park. It was meant to be a flexible space. Closed to traffic when needed, but with two-way traffic at other times to make the street active and safe. Robson Street in Vancouver was given as an example. It was estimated to cost about $1 million to repave 12th Avenue. Activating the sunny side on 12th Avenue with outdoor cafes would, I'm certain, have proven to be as popular as the brilliant Copper Kettle restoration on Scar Street. In any other city, this sunny south-facing street overlooking the park would be the most desirable and valuable commercial property, especially with its historic buildings, the Gordon Block and the Credit Foncier. Even before the WOW project came to town, many of us had dreamt of this street full of lively cafes open at night. Alas, the Novia, our last beloved classic 20th century diner, was gutted before the plaza was even completed. Even as late as June 22, 2009, an email from Denise Donahue, neighborhood planner for the city of Regina, did not mention altering Victoria Park. This new plan, which cuts into the park, seems to have come out of nowhere. Did we forget that Victoria Park was within the Victoria Park Heritage Conservation District? We're now left to cope with the deviations from the original plan. Bulky light standards that are too big for the scale of a pedestrian walkway, and bases which take up way too much of the walkable space. The fake lit-up trees, not aligned, clutter up the once useful sidewalk and interrupt the views of the heritage architecture around the park. Bewilderingly, each element on the plaza, the huge ungainly lights, the flashing lights on the trees, the wooden cabins at both ends of the plaza, all combine to destroy every vista. A vista is a most precious commodity. It allows citizens and visitors to see the beauty of our city and to see each other. This new design clutters up all vistas and misaligns the clear sight lines and the broad sidewalks we once had. I've heard no explanation for the wooden huts with their dangerous projecting walkways. An active streetscape with a vibrant downtown should be the goal for all of us who love this city. It was a simple and lovely idea to use what we have and to improve on it. But it has turned into a carnivalesque plaza with flashing lights and obstacles. The loss of the many trees makes downtown a hotter place in summer. So how did we come to this? Have the consultations and the goodwill of Regina citizens been twisted, and our time, given freely over 3 days, been wasted, or worse, usurped to give approval to a plan which had never been proposed? Who knew a park within the Victoria Park Heritage Conservation District could be tampered with so easily? The fence and bulldozers arrived and the trees were cut down before anyone could say a word. The plan to simply repave the street from Victoria Park to the buildings was lost. The plaza is now difficult to use as a street. To destroy a Frederick Todd Park, our only Victorian park, square, balanced, shady, enclosed, Victorian, think of Parc Saint-Louis in Montreal, is to deny our own history and to destroy our existing city planning, along with our cultural memory. We have cut an arc into Victoria Park, and now the city square is no longer square. Where did this plan come from? When was it approved? And who approved it? How did an elegant $1 million project, which preserved the street as a street, turn into a $12 million or more project with cost overruns, a lawsuit, and plastic pots as road markers? The courtesy of a response would be appreciated. And I'm dwelling on this, the first phase of Walk to Work, as a cautionary tale of how good intentions can go wrong and how, if we're not careful, we can lose heritage and our history, all for the sake of cheap or not so cheap novelty. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Any questions of our delegation? Thank you. Our next delegation, DE 12-74, Ms. Judith Versick. Welcome to City Council, Ms. Versick. We ask that you state your name and which organization you represent, if any, for the record, and you have up to 10 minutes to make your presentation. We ask that you follow the brief that you provided to the clerk's office earlier.
No problem. Good afternoon, City Council. Thank you for having me today. My name is Judith Versick, and I'm here today to speak on behalf of the Regina Downtown Business Improvement District. In 2009, the City of Regina adopted the Regina Downtown Neighborhood Plan, an ambitious, forward-thinking plan that visualized the future of downtown Regina and recommended the actions the city and other downtown stakeholders need to take in order to achieve that vision. The RD-BID wholeheartedly supported that plan and continues to support the city in implementing the RD&P vision. Thank you. After reviewing the downtown zone regulations and Part G, Regina Downtown Neighborhood Plan, RD-BID is pleased to offer its support for its approval by City Council. These initiatives, along with the Downtown Transportation Plan, the Downtown Housing Strategy, and the Downtown Parking Strategy, all speak to the importance of downtown Regina to the greater community. RD-BID is pleased to see the work that has been completed to date to adapt the policies and recommendations in the RD&P to work within the existing zoning bylaw and development plan. The completion of these amendments is extremely timely given the growth and ongoing development in downtown Regina. It has been a pleasure working with Diana Harlett, Fred Serrell, and their team on this most important project, and we look forward to continuing our partnership with the city in downtown Regina revitalization efforts. Thank you once again for this opportunity, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Ms. Versick. Are there any questions? Councillor O'Donnell.
Thanks, Your Worship. Welcome. You and I had a discussion at Planning Commission one day, and I'm going to revisit some of those questions. I think you've probably noticed, as I've noticed, a lot of people have an opinion about the downtown, and so I want to make sure that we get to talk about a couple things. So you made a reference in your presentation about a number of reviews that are going on. So I'm going to use that as the basis. One, to the best of your knowledge and the people that you deal with, how have they responded to the overall plan when new buildings have come on board and they've been evaluated against that? Have the people who live in the downtown and work and build in the downtown been pleased with the plan to date?
My understanding is that the developers that are developing in downtown refer to the RDNP for guidelines. In some cases, they weren't too pleased with having to spend perhaps more money in order to meet the heightened design standards that were identified in the plan. But as time has gone by, they're seeing the value in it, and it's been a positive experience.
Thank you. Secondly, let's just talk about parking a little bit. I'm only stretching this slightly, so bear with me. Parking is always an issue. So when some of these new buildings have come on board or are coming on board, I note that there is underground parking as part of that. That it appears to me that the people who are becoming lessees want to have parking right there. Has that been something that's been discussed or found to be useful or not?
I think wherever you go in North America, parking will be an issue. It's not an uncommon problem to have. And in our case, in some ways, it's actually good to have parking problems because that means people are coming downtown and there's commerce and trade occurring in our downtown. Now, that being said, I do believe that the developers that are coming online are striving to meet, to make available parking on site, preferably within the confines of their property, as opposed to what was happening in the past where they were going for caveated parking, which means they're not building underground parking, they're just leasing spaces in perpetuity off-site, which in hindsight probably wasn't the best plan to have because it locks up these developable lands for parking. So,
thank you. Perfect. I want to ask, and again, I'm referring to a conversation you and I had publicly at Planning Commission about people, again, whether it relates to parking or changes in the downtown, say, I won't come down or I will come down or whatever. So in your opinion, are there businesses opening in the downtown, closing in the downtown, or how's that working out?
I think there's definite interest in downtown. There's always businesses opening and closing either through growth or through probably not a sound business plan. Mm-hmm. But that being said, I know that there is demand for space in our downtown. I hear it quite a bit. People call me asking if I know of land that's for sale or buildings that are for sale. There's always some movement going on. And I think as time goes on, we'll begin to see some of the vacant stores that are on 11th now begin to fill up. It's just a matter of waiting for the market to move, and I think we're coming to that point.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your presentation. Our next delegation is Joanne Havelock. Welcome to City Council, Ms. Havelock. We ask that you state your name and which organization you represent, if any, for the record. You have up to 10 minutes to make your presentation. We ask that you follow the brief that you provided the clerk's office.
Okay, thanks very much. My name is Joanne Havelock, and I'm here representing the Friends of the Regina Public Library. Friends of the Regina Public Library have an ongoing commitment to support library services and ensure services are delivered in harmony with city residents, organizations, and neighborhoods. We have really appreciated the opportunities FERPL members have had to participate in the public involvement meetings for the downtown plan. There are many guidelines in the plan that would be positive and useful for designs that are effective, appealing to people, and address safety and many other matters. For Friends of the Library, with regard to development planning guidelines, our main concern is Central Library's location in downtown Regina and its part in the Victoria Park Heritage Conservation District. This is our understanding of what the design requirements would mean for upgrading Central Library, and any corrections or additional information from the City Administration on this interpretation would certainly be appreciated. The Central Library building already has many of the design features recommended in the guidelines. Appeal at street level and clearly recognizable entryway, for example. The library falls into an area requiring priority active frontage, encouraging storefront or public uses, patios, and outdoor uses. It is in the urban core area where design expression would be encouraged with a pedestrian-scaled environment and activity at street level. This is already the function of the current library building. The guidelines would require a 5-meter setback on the front, which fits with the current building. Construction to the property line would be allowed on the north and west sides. The current frontage of the library is about 3 commercial stories high, well within the guidelines of 3 to 5 commercial story frontage. If there was an addition to the current building, the maximum permitted floor area or intensity of use would be 2.0 for a commercial development, similar to the rest of downtown, but not as intense as the very downtown core. The allowable street wall height would be 2 to 3 commercial stories on the other side of the building, and then a portion of the building, the height of up to 10 commercial stories, would be allowed set back from the lower street sidewall levels. It may also be possible that bonusing for providing a public amenity would allow a greater height, and we've had some concern expressed about that today. If changes are made to Central Library, the building's effect on the neighboring Masonic Temple and the Federal Building and on Victoria Park will need to be considered. For example, the bylaws allow City Council to require additional height restrictions due to wind or sun shadow effects on the area. Victoria Park is defined as an area where pedestrian traffic is an important consideration for wind and sun shadow. In respect to the Regina Public Library Board's hopes to upgrade Central Library, Purple is supporting continuing the Film Theatre, Dunlop Art Gallery, and Prairie History Room, providing quality services and a welcoming atmosphere at the library, adopting consideration for the building as a heritage example of modernist architecture, adaptive reuse of the current building to retain this architecture, public ownership of the library building, wise use of public funds, and a design process that is open and invites involvement and input from the general public. The Central Library planning process up to this point has definitely not involved the sharing of public information and public consultation that is needed for such an important endeavor. However, at its June 26th meeting, the Library Board said it will share research documents that have been developed concerning the needs and options for Central Library. So far, these documents have not been made available, but we are looking forward to their public release. It is critical that modifications to the Central Library be done in effective consultation with surrounding neighbors, such as the Masonic Temple and the Federal Building, as well as the general public. It is important that the city have a strong approach to preservation of heritage properties, supported by strong bylaws and incentives for maintaining heritage, and that the definition of heritage be expanded to include more recent buildings, such as the 50-year-old modernist Central Library. The steps we mention are not all covered by the design guidelines we are talking about today, but together with the guidelines would form a positive approach to planning. In its responsibilities to appoint the library board and approve its mill rate, City Council has important responsibilities concerning the Regina Public Library. We hope that City Council, in its formal and informal discussions with the RPL board, will encourage and follow up to ensure such positive practices are followed in library planning, which would contribute to good planning for downtown Regina.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Ms. Hablock. Are there any questions of our delegation? See none. Once again, thank you very much for your presentation. Councilor Berger, report 121.
Your Worship, I'm pleased to move concurrence on behalf of Planning Commission. Report CR 12-121. This is the Regina Downtown Neighborhood Plan. amendments to bylaw 7877, which is the Regina Development Plan, as well as the zoning bylaw 9250. There are 5 recommendations, Your Worship. I'll go over them very quickly here. The first one, of course, is to amend the current bylaw development plan to the bylaw which we'll be considering in a moment, as well as an amendment to bylaw 9250 as provided for in Appendix B. Now, Your Worship, Appendix A of the report outlines the proposed official community plan amendments, and there's a 1-page, and there's 7 points on that one, which would be considered as part of this report. And Appendix B is the proposed amendments to the zoning bylaw 9250, and those are outlined in the report. So I want to make a small housekeeping amendment, Your Worship, just to recommendations 1 and 2. Just for clarity, it says it's generally provided in Appendix A and Appendix B. I'd like to strike the word generally out of here, and that we discussed this at Planning Commission. The more precise one is that these are exactly what is contained in Appendix A and B. So if I could make that amendment, if I could. So recommendation number 1 would strike the word generally in the first line, and recommendation number 2 would strike the word generally as well in line 1.
Your Worship, I'd second that amendment from Councillor Frazier.
So it would read as provided.
As provided, right? Not as generally provided, just for clarity.
Okay. Discussion on the amendment? All in favor? Against? Carried. Go ahead, Councillor Frazier.
Thank you for that, Your Worship. Just more substantively on the report itself, very pleased to recommend this report. This, in fact, is a report that was approved in 2009. What we have now is actually the bylaw will affect those changes. I know one of the delegations made the point of discussing, they were concerned that we were taking so long to make these changes. And I think it's important after such a long time of consultation from 2007, 2009, where we had a tremendous amount of engagement with the public, to look at a downtown plan that really had been, well, the current one was 20 years sitting there using that one. We really wanted to update and revitalize downtown for some contemporary planning purposes. So we did pass this in 2009, and there has been 5 projects that have been approved by council, and they have done so with the provisions of the report itself. Now, while there wasn't the force of law in the sense of a bylaw passing, there was very rigid reviews done, and I'll name those projects. The Capital Point project, which is really the Plains Hotel, that one was designed with respect to the plans contained in the report before us tonight. The Hill Center Tower 3, the office that's been suggested at Rose and 12th Avenue, the gardens on Rose, and the office building at 11th Avenue and Albert Street all have been using the plans contained in the report before us. So it is quite important for the public to know that we followed this report. Page 3 of this report speaks to the reasons why there's been a delay. And I would say it's not so much a delay as it's an understanding of the implications of this kind of report. It's been 20 years since we looked at the downtown report, and much of the work, it takes a lot of time to do that. We had a change to write the bylaw in legal words as opposed to a report written by Jennifer Keesmath, the consultant, and with the city. We had changeover of staff that took place, but at no time did we not have this sit on the shelf and not use it. It was really very much integrated in the decision-making and planning process for downtown. The report fundamentally is exactly what was in the public report that was approved in 2009, but I want to point out a couple of changes that have been recommended to Planning Commission, and they are, in fact, recommended to Council tonight. They are, in my view, minor. They do not change in any way the substance of the plan before us. The first one is the podium setback. Because of the design of particular buildings, there may be the setback may not be quite as far as has been in the current plan, but they will only make those changes as long as it does not affect the wind and sun applications as we go forward. So, in other words, when we had the podium setback, this was done to ensure that the wind would not sweep the street. It would be actually bouncing away from the street, so the streets is easier to walk around. In some instances, there may be some changes to that. The slab length of buildings, and in particular, this one I'm thinking of the Rose and 12th Avenue one. 55 meters is seen to be the absolute length there could be, but now that may be changing depending upon the application that comes forward. And some of the sign regulations, that is to say the signs on the side of buildings, those applications may change. So there'll be more consultation with the public before those are determined. This is I think, one of the biggest changes we've had this term on council, Your Worship. The entire review and change of how we make our downtown more livable, how we make it more pedestrian friendly, and how we make it more modern. And I think that the public consultation through this, and I've heard nothing that was of any real substantive criticism of this report by anyone. Now, some of the projects that go forward may be a different subject matter, but in terms of the principles behind it, the planning concepts behind it has been talked about a lot through the community over the last number of years. And this report tonight before us is the bylaw culmination, so it will be the actual legal implication for it. I want to point out one last thing, Your Worship, that it's not just the businesses that are downtown. Part of the plan is to attract between 2,500 and 5,000 people living downtown in the next 15 years. And this will very much change the character and the need for downtown businesses and having more people live downtown. So it's really, do you have the business first or residents first? And this is a balance between trying to attract residential combination, not just businesses downtown. So I'm very pleased on behalf of the Planning Commission to recommend concurrence in the report and bylaws before us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Berger. Councillor Clipsham.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. As Councillor Fougere pointed out, and as the report says, it's been a long time coming, but I agree that we have been, as council and as planning commission and as administration, consistent with, once we adopted that report, even though it wasn't in a bylaw form, ensuring that project developments that were proposed did meet the requirements of the plan. So this is kind of a formality, although some have said it's overdue. A couple of comments have been raised by the delegations tonight. I didn't hear opposition to what we're doing tonight, which is formalizing the development plan, the downtown development plan. In fact, some complimentary remarks about the consultation and that the walk to work philosophy is the appropriate one. Susan Burley asked about how it came to be with the development of the plaza that one of the existing development bylaws that exist, the Heritage Conservation District bylaw, which, as she spelled out, talks about lighting and furniture and those kinds of things. How did it come to be that we ended up with very modern lighting and sturdy but not heritage furniture?
Mr. Carlson?
Your Worship, during the consultation process, there was consultation for the Regina Downtown Neighborhood Plan, which was referenced, but there was also consultation related to an updating of the Victoria Park Master Plan, and then also towards the approval of the first project of that, and that was the City Square Plaza. And it was at that time that this was reviewed, and it was just determined through the review process that there was a complementary element to the design, opposed to something that would simply mimic past architectural features. So there was a full consultation process that led to that design.
Thank you. I've got to say that during the Folk Festival, the weekend before last, that hard surface area, which is now used by the food vendors and tables set out, etc., is absolutely beautiful. It's just fantastic. It's much better than what it used to be, where tables and whatnot were on the grass and perhaps in the mud, depending if it had rained. Very well used and very well appreciated. The conversations I had with people during pie time was where they were all very appreciative of what that plaza offers. So I think it's working. However, that said, Jean Ma made the criticism that the vistas have been destroyed by those cabins or whatever they're called. I certainly agree with that. I was disappointed to see that one building, because as you're walking east along the side of the library, you can't see down 12th Avenue because there's that, I don't know what it is. I don't know what it does, but it's there, and it kind of blocks the view of looking east. Joanne Havelock asked if if her interpretation of the impact of the downtown plan on what the library could do to redevelop that building is the correct interpretation. I think I've got that right. Can the administration answer that? Has she got is her interpretation match yours?
Mr. Carlson?
Your Worship, for the details of that, I might defer to Mr. Fred Searle, Manager of Current Planning.
Thank you.
Mr. Searle?
Yes, Your Worship. The development standards that would apply to the site would be for a street wall of about 3 to 5 commercial stories, roughly 13 meters to 19 meters in height. Above that, step backs would be applied to taller building elements. And certainly the downtown plan at this location would promote active edges around the site, so promoting activity at street level and engaging uses and programmed activity in front of the building.
Thanks. One of the significant innovations of the downtown plan is it introduces bonusing into the development process. And I'm quite excited about that. We can't require a developer to put a green roof on his building. We can't require him or her to develop some public art that is for the benefit of all. But we can entice them through bonuses. So the bonus would allow them to have extra height if they do this, that, and the other. I think, and we discussed this in detail at the time of the approval of the report, but I think this is ideal. This is the way to go, because it does give the flexibility to the developer to say, well, that's an expense I can't afford, or that's an extra that I'd really like to have, and therefore I'll find a way of putting something for the public good in place that will benefit the corporation or the developer privately. And I think that's the way to go. So I'm not at all opposed to bonusing. In fact, I was very an enthusiastic supporter of introducing it. And as members of council will know, I've been looking for bonusing in some of the subsequent discussions we've had around office development in the suburban area. So I'm very happy to see this put in place. I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clipson. Further discussion on the report? Councillor Brown?
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I'd like to begin by reiterating some of the comments from my colleagues and thanking the delegations that came forward this evening. We always appreciate hearing from our citizens and the passionate remarks that you've shared with us always inform and assist. So again, thank you very much. With respect to the report itself, Your Worship, I wanted to get some clarification, maybe just speak a little bit about, I guess, the delay generally, but just really what that means, if anything. And on page 3, Your Worship, the second bullet states that the report that was approved by City Council was not bylaw ready, and as such could not be immediately adopted into the official community plan or zoning bylaw. Now, I have an idea, Your Worship, of what a bylaw-ready report is, but perhaps I could just make sure that my understanding is correct. So could I ask, please, what does that mean? What is a bylaw-ready report, please?
Mr. Carlson?
Your Worship, it relates mostly to language used within and presentation in terms of material, maps and so forth, and references to those. Mr. Searle sort of led the preparation of that, so I might call upon him to provide a little more detail surrounding that.
Mr. Searle?
Your Worship, I'm not sure there's much more to add beyond what Mr. Carlson has indicated. The particular attention was paid to the language in the walk to work document and the conversion of that into bylaw language, as well as the overall formatting of the document and determining how it would best fit within our regulatory frameworks in the official community plan and the zoning bylaw.
Well, thanks very much for that, Your Worship. I'm going to conclude from that it takes a little bit more time then to get a report into a bylaw-ready condition. But, you know, I'm not sure that it necessarily mattered whether we had the consultant's report concluded, then we had a report that was not bylaw-ready, and now the bylaws, or we could have waited more time between the consultant's report and the bylaw-ready report, but I think it would all net out in the end. But I just want to flesh that out a bit and make sure. What have been the consequences of the time lag, if any, from the report until now? I know this report references 5 projects, which have all had rigorous standards applied to it as contained in the downtown neighborhood plan. Have there been any developments that slipped through the cracks that the rigorous standards were not applied to? Through you, please, Your Worship.
Mr. Carlson?
Your Worship, there were not. So as referenced by Councillor Fougere, the 5 projects did receive the scrutiny and the review of the adopted 2009 Regina Downtown Neighborhood Plan. So there was no consequence as a result of this delay.
Well, thank you for that. And just to put it another way, Your Worship, just to make absolutely certain, had this particular report, or had the bylaws been passed before those 5 development projects had come through, would there have been any differences in the ultimate result? Through you, please, Your Worship.
Mr. Carlson?
Your Worship, we believe not. The only difference would have been that through the working with the downtown neighborhood plan, there were some elements that were changed, which were identified again by Councillor Fougere. So those would have resulted in bylaw amendments at the time that we would have come forward with the approvals.
Well, thank you for that. You know, during most of these development applications, I had the honor at the time of being on Planning Commission, and of course at Planning Commission we're able to have a little bit more thorough dialogue with the applicants, the developers, the architects, etc. And it was a very fruitful and interesting exercise personally to go through that, you know, maybe to shed some light on the larger question of you know, what is the role of government and to what extent should government interfere with or regulate the market. This was an excellent example because we had applicants coming forward and we were applying a more stringent standard to what they had to provide. We were requiring certain public amenities from them. And while initially, as Ms. Veresic mentioned, there was some reluctance to go forward with these increased investments and higher costs, however, the architects and the developers, as they went through the process, as they worked through it and gained some familiarity with the actual framework, they came to understand that it's not, they're not being singled out. Every single applicant had to raise the bar. Every developer, every project had to provide more public amenities. And when they came to appreciate that they weren't being singled out, that we were simply raising the bar and it was a level playing field but at a higher standard, they all bought in. And part of the reason they expressed, at least to us at the time, that they all bought in was they wanted to be proud of their projects. They were more proud of their projects. The product that they delivered at the end of the day served greater public use, had greater public amenities, and some of the examples are we now have office towers in our downtown with art galleries. We now have office space in our downtown that have public meeting venues, and we never would have had that but for this framework. So it was a very fruitful exercise. The applicants, the developers, they all had more pride in their projects at the end of the day, and the framework was well received by all involved. So happy to see this come forward. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor O'Donnell.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'm going to deal a little bit with other implications as stated in the report and ask for the administration to comment a little bit on this. I am going to just ask one question, though, first. I think some of you know that I just came back from Chicago. I want you to know I walked the loop. I went down Astor Street in Dearborn and State and so on. And the one thing I can tell you is that there's no place to sit. So I noted in the comments from one of the delegations, and Councillor Clipsham as well identified that, is about seating that's in here. So can I just ask why we would have seating when Chicago, which is a state-of-the-art city when it comes to architecture and design, doesn't have public seating? Mr. Carlson?
Your Worship, in terms of downtown becoming a pedestrian place, it was also to be a place of gathering and activity and destination.
Yep.
So seating's just a natural.
I like seating. Thank you for that. So it was just struck me during the conversation. To the administration on this, Your Worship, I'm curious about implications. And so obviously there was a ton of consultation here, and there's a plan, and there's a bylaw, and so on now. What does this mean for Design Regina and that official community plan, please?
Mr. Carlson?
Your Worship, the downtown neighborhood plan will become part of the development plan, and we intend for that policy to carry forward and just be contained within the official community plan in some form.
So everything that is in this plan becomes part of the official community plan and also then serves as a basis for that plan?
Mr. Carlson?
Yes, Your Worship, that is the intent here. We're not looking to make amendments within the downtown area, given the recency of this.
Thank you. So could you also then comment on how the transportation master plan fits into this as well, or how this fits into that? I'm not sure which way to go.
Mr. Carlson?
Your Worship, very similarly, the downtown or the transportation master plan is at a relatively high level. There are some subsequent plans, though, and some current ongoing plans that may lead to some amendments, both revising some of the OCP or downtown neighborhood plan bylaw, and that might be the downtown transportation study or the transit investment plan when we're looking at route reviews. So some of these may have some minor adjustments that may be required within the downtown plan.
It specifically states in the downtown plan about a desire to have people live in the downtown. We also are currently engaged in a comprehensive housing strategy. Can you apply the two together for me, please?
Mr. Carlson?
Your Worship, the comprehensive housing strategy is looking at sort of citywide policies and strategy to tie city's activity in housing to the province in terms of an advocacy role, support role. There will also be some specific note in terms of geographical need related to those programs and policies, and that will inform the OCP. Unlikely to have impact upon amendments in the downtown neighborhood plan, but I would note that in addition to the comprehensive housing strategy that the city's undertaking, the Regina Downtown Business Improvement District has commissioned the same consultant to do some additional work focused on the downtown. So we'll see what comes out of that and how that influences the OCP.
Thank you. There are a couple others referenced here, and so, for example, one is the office use. I think we've discussed that at length. Downtown transportation study, you've mentioned that. I'm not familiar with this specifically, so downtown serviceability study, could you tell me what that is and then how that applies, please?
Carlson?
Your Worship, as you're likely aware, some of the oldest infrastructure exists in the downtown of the city because it's the oldest part of the city. So there are certain capacity issues and water infiltration issues within the downtown. So we're looking at just within the downtown what our capacity is within each of the streets and within the systems, and where we'd need to look at upgrades to accommodate certain intensification.
Thank you. You also mentioned in the report that we are undertaking several heritage studies. I'm assuming some of that would have an implication on the downtown.
Mr. Carlson?
Your Worship, that would have implication upon the downtown and sort of inner city area, warehouse district, more in general as well.
Okay, and the last one is the Regina Revitalization Initiative is mentioned here. Is there any thought of tying the downtown warehouse district together in terms of some of these initiatives in the downtown plan, or is this separate?
Carlson?
Your Worship, that would be another initiative that once some additional planning occurs for specifically the CPR sites, that there may be some amendments that come to the downtown plan that would see for a linkage between the two neighborhoods. It's been a long-term goal of City Council to find some ways to link those two neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Your Worship, I'm very pleased and very proud of the report that's before us. I'll be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor O'Donnell. Councillor Boucher to close debate.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just very briefly, I just want to take people back to 2007 when we began the process of this review and the consultation that took place. A significant amount of time and effort and goodwill by many people in this room that spoke to that and were part of the process, and the delegation spoke to their participation tonight. One of the things that Council said at the time was that we didn't want this report to sit on the shelf. I remember that very distinctly. We were excited about it. We we felt as a community and as a council and administration that a lot of good work was put into this. And I think that we've seen this now that we had 5 projects that came on virtually right after the report was put forward. And I would suggest that there really wasn't a lot of difficulty with the private sector to understand the rules of engagement, because it wasn't the issue of, I'll use the issue of bonusing as an example. Councilor Gibson talked a bit about that one. That's fundamental to what makes the downtown so different. But there wasn't, to my recollection, any developer that said, I don't want to do that. Now, they said, I want to talk to where the money goes in the public realm, whether it would be for artwork or for community rooms or for seating somewhere or cafe somewhere, but they didn't say they didn't want to do that. They wanted to understand it, but they didn't say they didn't like it. So even those major developments that took place espoused this change dramatically, so they're for it. But they also wanted to see the an investment in the public realm first as an important first step to show that we as a community and as a city, we're going to take this seriously. And thus the WOW project, or the Plaza project, was put forward. And that has been, in my view, the single most significant physical change downtown, and very much for the better. And while we can talk about what the amenities are in there, and case in point by the delegations, I respect their opinions, no question about that. I'm not going to dispute anything they say, other than to say that these are issues of how we as a community grow together, and there are some growing pains that happen. And the Plaza is one of those. But if we look at the Plaza as its impact on the downtown, it is huge. Councilor Clifford mentioned the folk festival that happened this last weekend. But anytime you go look at the Plaza on Wednesday afternoon or Saturday morning, it is thriving with a lot of people that are very happy to be there, and I hear nothing but great comments about that. So we've all done this in good faith to drive our community forward, to provide a more friendly, pedestrian-friendly development for downtown is very, very important. So aside from that project, what I hear, even now that it's here, people are happy to see it here, and they're glad it's there. It's a focal point for downtown. This is a great project. This is a great example of community involvement and engagement to provide a new development for downtown. So I certainly want to thank the delegations here that spoke about this, those many people who informed us and helped us come to these conclusions over the last several years, and of course the administration for the work they did to make sure this came forward too. So I'm very pleased to very much support this bylaw before us, and as we go forward, all of the other plans, developments will have the same stringent guidelines to go forward, and we'll all be the better for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fougere. I'll call for the question. All those in favor? Against? That is carried unanimously. Next report, CR 12-122, which is an application for an amendment, zoning amendment. Councillor Fougere?
Yes, Your Worship, just getting my iPad working here. This is an application for a zoning bylaw and concept plan amendment for Harbor Landing Phase 7-1B. And as I go down to the report, I'll tell you more details about that. The applicant would like to, just find it here. There'll be a change to Phase 7 of the Harbor Landing Concept Plan. Essentially, Your Worship, there is a change of Phase 7 to bring in currently District Control District 12, which is a narrow lot right now. That was changed in 2012. The change now is to provide for a R5 zoning for a minimum density residential in order to accommodate a much larger density. There'll be 3 units, a townhouse dwelling, and the plan was reviewed by Planning Commission and they recommend concurrence. It's important to note that there'll be some dwellings here that will be constituting supportive living homes, which does require an amendment to the plan, and Planning Commission has reviewed this and recommends concurrence.
Thank you, Councillor Fougere. Discussion? I call for the question. All those in favor? Against? That is carried. Report CR 12-123, which is another zoning amendment.
Your Worship, on behalf of Planning Commission, I'm pleased to recommend concurrence in the application for zoning bylaw amendment to the Riverbend subdivision. And Again, if I can find the right place here for this proposal, is that the remaining 5.78 hectares of the concept planned area would be zoned to accommodate development of high-density housing. And the proposed subdivision includes a dedication of municipal reserve lands east of the subject lands from Tregarva to Quant Street. The applicant has requested that the residential portion designated as parcel K be rezoned from urban holding to R6, which is the multiple housing residential, and the municipal reserve lands would be rezoned from urban holding, and public service to the north of the lake stormwater retention pond would be rezoned to urban holding through floodway. Planning Commission recommends concurrence. This is not really a change to the concept plan, Your Worship. It simply is now the land development side of it.
Thank you, Councillor Fugere. Discussion? Seeing none, call for the question. All those in favor? Against? That is carried. CR 12-124. Councillor Fugere.
Your Worship, this is an application for discretionary use and zoning approval for office, industrial, and research development. Rezoning from industrial prestige to office accommodation at 4545 and 4561 Parliament Avenue. Members will recall that we had a long discussion of a policy change in this chamber and through Planning Commission about where and when we can have office growth outside the downtown core. It is generally held to be that most of that development would happen downtown, but we have changed the policy to allow for up to 4,000 square meters per year in two designated areas in the city. This application was very much in the forefront of the discussion as we went forward. And as I'll just speak to some of the details of this application before us. The applicant would like to propose a three-story building with a gross floor area of 40,000 square feet. The building is identical to the first one that was approved in the first phase over a year ago. The 3 stories height would be 11.7 meters. And this, Your Worship, is a sign of the growing economy where we do have the need for office space that is not, would not go downtown, that is serviced through others near the airport or through southern Saskatchewan, and we can think of engineering companies that have heavy equipment that wouldn't necessarily be downtown. This does reflect the change of the policy for office accommodation, and therefore, Planning Commission recommends concurrence from City Council.
Thank you. I just want to make a note that Mr. Dale Greaser is in the gallery if there are any questions of the applicant. Seeing none. Okay, thank you. Further discussion on the report? Call for the question. All those in favor? Against? That is carried. And last on the Planning Commission reports is 125. Councillor Fugere.
Thank you, Your Worship. Very pleased to recommend concurrence in a contract zone application for a proposed cultural arts center and licensed restaurant, performance venue, and live and work units at 1621 11th Avenue. I note that Carol Cairns, who is the proponent, is in the gallery tonight on this, and I'll just review the proposal before us. The applicant wants to develop what's called a cultural arts center in an existing building. The main floor of that building would contain a cultural arts center, a licensed restaurant, and performance venue on the main floor that's approximately 223 square meters of gross floor space, as well as a restaurant with a maximum capacity of 125 seats. There's also an existing medical office on the west end of the main floor. The second floor would be for the arts industry and related studios and up to 8 live and work units. In the basement would be studios and performance spaces. Very interesting and unique form of development for downtown. And I do believe that the Heritage Community Plan also does envisage this kind of activity happening. So Planning Commission was really excited to see this. It is very much a hybrid kind of a development. And I had the opportunity to visit the site with Ms. Cairns last week just to look around to see what they're doing. And it's quite a remarkable, interesting process. So very encouraged to see this. And I was inquisitive because I've not seen in my time on council for 15 years this kind of unique application. And I wish Ms. Cairns very well in her endeavors, and certainly would hope that Council will approve the development tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fougere. Discussion? Call for the question. All those in favor? Against? That is carried. We will now go through a number of bylaws. Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Your Worship. I move, seconded by Councillor Clipson, that bylaws 2012-67, 68, 56, 57, 64, and 69 be introduced and read first time.
Thank you, Councillor Hutchison. Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Your Worship. City Council is about to consider a number of bylaws, and these bylaws relate to the reports that have just been discussed. The required advertising has taken place, but if there is anyone in the audience who would like to address City Council, I would invite you to come forward at this time. There is no one, Your Worship.
Thank you. I'll call for the question on the first reading. All those in favor? Against? That's carried. Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you. I move, seconded by Councillor Fougere, that bylaws 2012-67, 68, 56, 57, 64, and 69 be read a second time.
All those in favor? Against? That's carried.
I move, seconded by Councillor Findura, that Council hereby consents to bylaws 2012-67, 68, 56, 57, 64, 69, going to a third reading at this meeting.
All in favor? Against? That's carried unanimously.
I move, seconded by Councillor Murray, that bylaws 2012-67, 68, 56, 57, 64, and 69 be read a third time.
Discussion? Call for the question. All those in favor? Against? That is carried. Next item on the agenda is Delegation DE 12-76, Colin Stewart. Welcome to City Council, Mr. Stewart. We ask that you state your name and which organization you represent, if any, for the record. You have up to 10 minutes to make your presentation. We ask that you follow the brief that you provided the clerk's office earlier.
Good evening, members of council, your worship, city administration. My name is Colin Stewart, excuse me, and I'm here representing myself as a tax-paying citizen of Regina and as a concerned resident of Saskatchewan. I'm here tonight to speak about the acquisition of the southeast lands from the Saskatchewan Housing Corporation. Specifically, I would like to address the funds that are being used to purchase these lands. After reviewing the report EX 12-24 submitted to the Executive Committee, I note that $7.3 million is being allocated from the Social Development Reserve, with the remainder from the General Fund Reserve for the purchase of these lands. From what I understand, the Social Development Reserve is intended and used to provide incentives to builders to develop affordable housing units in the city of Regina. I'm very pleased to hear that such a fund exists. However, what concerns me is that the Social Development Reserve would be depleted to zero with this purchase, with the anticipation of replenishing the fund upon future development and or sale of the lands. However, there is no firm commitment in the documents I've read, and in fact, there is nothing stating that any of the revenues realized have to be put back towards the Social Development Reserve or any affordable housing incentives. This concerns me, as it can be seen as a way to reallocate a large sum of money that had otherwise only been intended to be used to develop affordable housing in Regina, and thus loses the benefit that the citizens of Regina otherwise would realize. As such, I would like to request that you add a clause in the documents that states that the $7.3 million must be replenished to the Social Development Reserve, specifically for the Affordable Housing Incentive Program, as well as a portion of any additional revenues. I will leave that up to you and or city administration to determine with what a reasonable percentage would be, but I feel that the former arrangement with Sask Housing of 75% would be deemed fair. This way, the extra funds are used specifically for what they should be for, and not just as an extra source of revenue for the city. Also, I would like to request that a certain portion of the lands sold or developed in this arrangement be dedicated to affordable housing units. Thank you for your time, and I will now welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you for your presentation. Are there any questions of our delegation? Seeing none, thank you again for your presentation. Report 126, which is the acquisition of the Southeast lands from Saskatchewan Housing Corporation. Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Your Worship. I bring before you the report here. I'm just going to back out of my... Bring before you CR 12-126, acquisition of South lands from Saskatchewan Housing Corporations. Recommendation has 6 recommendations, and I move concurrence.
Thank you. Councillor Fougere.
Worship, this is a significant proposal before us tonight. We're actually going to be purchasing a parcel of land in southeast Regina for about $7.825 million. And money will be coming to that from the Social Development Reserve as well as through our General Reserve. It's important because we are going to be developing land and be the owner of that land. And I had a couple of questions for the administration on the balance in the reserve itself. The first report that we had for us tonight in our housing policy dedicated $2.2 million. And now we are looking at an expenditure of about $7.8 million. I don't think we're depleting that reserve. I just wanted to get an understanding of where we are with that. So from the administration, Your Worship, just to understand where we're at with that.
Mr. Carlson.
Your Worship, that is correct. The maximum that would be allocated through capital grants annually would be up to 2.2. Currently in the Social Development Reserve, we have about $4 million. And this $7.3 million that we reference in the report and would be using is currently held in trust by Sask Housing. So we wouldn't be taking anything out of our current funds in social development. This is money that would have been allocated to us at a future date. And the report also notes under the financial implications as a condition of the sale that using that money, any of the proceeds or the first $7.3 million of profits would have to go back into social development or housing. That would be a condition of the sale of the land.
Right. So that's important, Your Worship, to understand for the delegation and for others that we're not depleting the reserve by any means by going forward in this way. Your Worship, this is the Sask Housing Corporation has indicated it wants to divest itself of the land, and the City of Regina has a right of first refusal to accept that. And this is an opportunity for the city to secure land and revenue for social housing and for housing purposes, and partnering with the province on providing housing in our city. Very important element for us. From my perspective, Your Worship, the most important element beyond making the decision, of course, is what do we do, what fashion are we involved in developing land? Do we want to be the developer of the land and take the risk, higher risk and a higher return? Or do we want to have another fashion where we have another company that may do it for us? So there is a recommendation that that in the fourth quarter of this year, the administration come back with a discussion of what exactly, what model would we use to develop the land. We'll make the decision later on as to how we do that. But the important element is that we are securing land, securing revenue sources for us for housing and maybe other activities as well. Not really sure what that would be in the future. That's for other councils to decide perhaps. But what fundamentally is here is that the administration and this council understand its responsibilities working with the province and housing to provide that for our community. So I'm very much in favor of supporting this and ask members of council to support it. And I'm looking forward to that report in the fall of this year to determine the mechanism and the model of how we will develop this land into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fougere. Madam Clerk, do you have a comment?
I do have a question, and I'm going to see if others who were at exec have the same recollection as me, is that the original report came forward with 6 recommendations, and we then added a number 7 and a number 8. So I'm just checking that, in fact, we're concurring with all 8. Thank you.
That's correct. Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Your Worship. Actually, my question was answered when Councillor Fougere asked his.
Sure. Councillor Clipson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yes, on page 5 of the report, there's a bit of a graphic which lists or shows shows the relationships between investment, risk, and revenue according to how we're going to manage the lands that we're acquiring. The sell unserviced land is the low risk and low reward and low investment way of going about it, and the continuum ends on the right with self-managed development, a very high risk but high reward in terms of revenue approach. Now, I asked the question at Executive Committee, where would Saskatoon fall in that continuum? And I was told they would fall right at the right-hand high risk, high reward end. Well, I've advocated for many years in this forum that we should be looking closely at the Saskatoon model. Now, Saskatoon City Fathers of a couple of generations ago, in their wisdom, decided to go with the land bank approach. This is not something that just happened overnight or in the last decade with City Council. Indeed, when I was at university in the 60s up there, they had the land bank was well established at that time. So they were purchasing land decades and decades ago that is now up for sale, and the difference is profit, if I can use that word. Well, what the Saskatoon City Council has been able to do with those profits is, first of all, fund one of the most innovative social housing programs in Canada. Secondly, they've been able to reduce to some extent the pressures on the mill rate. And third, they've created a bit of consternation in the development community, which has said that the land that the city puts up for development is amongst the most expensive that they have to do. Well, that's a decision of Saskatoon City Council. They can make that decision. They can sell it cheaper. They can sell it dear. They can make a profit, which they can then invest in social housing, or they can sell it cheaply and let the developers profit by that cheap acquisition. So I too am looking forward to the report. In fact, I'm disappointed I won't be here to review it, but maybe I'll be back.
Never know.
But I think it's important that Regina City Council consider a land bank scheme that, while we're not the developer necessarily, does allow us to acquire land, hold it, and at the appropriate time sell it, and use the profits for good reasons. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clifton. Just Councillor Brown, go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you, Your Worship. We had a very fulsome discussion about this at Executive Committee, and particularly recommendation number 7, which sort of goes beyond the initial step. Yes, we're going to acquire the land. Then the question is, what are we going to do with it? Recommendation 7 discusses that next question. One of the most interesting aspects of the whole affordable housing or housing issue in general that we've come across has come from one of our very credible organizations in the city that builds affordable housing in a very unique approach, and that is Habitat for Humanity. Habitat for Humanity has identified that they've essentially run out of land on which to build further units according to their program. So just want to ask the administration a question through you, Your Worship. We are also simultaneously developing, well, as we've heard this evening, a number of reports and studies and policy objectives that will assist us down the road. But specifically, Your Worship, I'd like to ask the administration, how does this particular report overlap or interact with our housing policy in general, please?
Your Worship, I think there's 2 responses there. First of all, it is somewhat separate from a lot of the studies that we're doing, simply because we are dealing with ending a contract that we currently have with Sask Housing, and there's certain obligations that we have that carry forward with this related to funding of affordable housing projects. So that was intended originally. The partnership with Sask Housing was that revenue would be used towards that affordable housing, so that would be maintained. But in terms of land development, the comprehensive housing strategy is looking at ways to leverage city-owned land and other regulatory tools that could be used on privately held land to stimulate affordable housing development.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor O'Donnell?
Thanks. I want to pick up on a comment that was made not only today, but was made it last time at council, and it's about available land. So through the administration, if I could just ask something to this effect. So I know that Harbor Landing still has some open spaces there. I see that. Habitat has mentioned that they're running out of land. We know that this is the last phase of Riverbend that came forward today. So generally speaking, are we running out of serviced land?
Mr. Carlson?
Your Worship, yes, I think you've heard from most developers that the 10 to 15 year supply of service land that we thought we had a few years ago certainly has been accelerated. And one of the components of the official community plan is to look at the next phasing of new growth and where services should be extended. And that's being developed now over the next year. So we'd be seeing a new growth strategy for the next phase of development within the OCP.
Thank you. And so just so that I understand, where are these lands that we're talking about in this report located?
Mr. Carlson?
Your Worship, these lands, the southeast lands, are immediately east of the Windsor Park neighborhood and north of the Greens on Gardner neighborhood in southeast Regina.
So as those two neighborhoods complete, is this the next land that potentially could be developed? In other words, it's not 3 miles away from them, it's next door?
Mr. Carlson?
Yes, Your Worship. In fact, a portion of this land is currently within what has been termed the town's concept plan area. So it's eligible for development. It just simply hasn't been because of Sask Housing's desire to remove itself from development.
Thank you. And, Your Worship, in the report, there's also reference to the Northwest lands that we talked about a couple of years ago. And so could I ask specifically to the area of the Northwest, is there serviceable land for housing out there right now?
Mr. Carlson?
Your Worship, there is serviceable land in a number of different neighborhoods within the Northwest currently. The Sask housing lands that have been referenced are within city limits but aren't serviced or don't have an approved concept plan at this point.
Thank you. So I find this a rather exciting notion, Your Worship. I remember specifically talking about the Northwest lands a while back, and I was one of the ones who said that we shouldn't option on that. I actually probably would change my mind if that came forward right now. I look forward to the fall for who's ever sitting here to make sure that they make their correct decision, but this is a rather unique opportunity. So whether it is looking after social housing and so on and having that same fund, whether it's making some money to apply to many projects, either way I'm okay with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Donnell. Councillor Murray.
Thanks very much, Your Worship, and I too am excited about the process we have before us here and where we can end up at. One of the things that Councillor Clipson's always been very strong on in new and developing neighborhoods is solar orientation. And it would be my desire to like to see, as Councillor Clipson did, I know many of us, to see new developments move that way. At what point in the stage would we want to begin to mandate solar ready or solar orientation, or the potential for us to think outside the box when it comes to the way that we have these lots being serviced?
Mr. Carlson?
Your Worship, that has been raised before and is within the context of the official community plan now. So we're looking at all environmental or sustainable types of initiatives related to neighborhood design, including that.
Excellent, and I appreciate hearing that, because again, it's important. I think those citizens that are going to be moving to those neighborhoods do have the opportunity to have a home that's going to be a better, more environmentally friendly home. Thanks, Your Worship.
Thank you. Just clarification from the administration, because sometimes there's information that's shared or information that's in reports that sometimes is misunderstood, and I think it's sometimes comments are made that are actually misleading. So I want to make sure that everyone, including the media, understands what is happening with the Social Development Reserve Fund. And, there was the question by our delegation, Mr. Stewart, that was concerned that we were draining the Social Development Reserve Fund. So maybe you can once again provide us with exactly where the $7.3 million is coming from and what monies will be still in a reserve, the Social Development Reserve Fund, just for clarification for everyone's purpose.
Your Worship, happily do that. In terms of our current balance of Social Development Reserve, there's $4 million that the city has in its bank. There's $7.3 million that Sask Housing is holding that would be transferred to the city's social development reserve, but that's the money that's being allocated here. As indicated in the report, we're obligated upon development of that land to repay that $7.3 million to the social development reserve, and we'd also be looking at revenues realized from the development to meet future commitments of the social development reserve. And so that means there's the $4 million, 7.3 will be repaid, and then in the future, as this land is developed, a portion of that would also be committed to social development reserve. Under our existing contract with Sask Housing, if we weren't to be ending this contract and purchasing the land, we'd be receiving 75% of the proceeds. So as Councillor Foucher indicated, in the fourth quarter, we'll be coming forward with a report outlining what we anticipate some of those profits might be and how much we'd be looking at moving into the social development reserve.
So in fact, the Social Development Reserve Fund will not be drained, and this transaction with Sask Housing will actually provide us with an opportunity to increase the fund as it currently exists.
Absolutely, Your Worship.
Thank you very much for that understanding. Call for the question. All those in favor? Against? That is carried. We will now move on to Report 127 on Planning Commission. Councillor Fougere.
Your Worship, this is the last report from Planning Commission this evening. And we have before us an application for discretionary use approval for proposed retail office use over 1,000 square meters at 3725 East Quant Street. This is an interesting proposal, Your Worship, because it's in the report you'll see that there's a two-story building that will be constructed on the property. There's a graph that shows the gross floor area use, which will explain the size of the building. Office will be just under 1,000 square meters, which makes it a permitted use. But the retail size, 1,541 square meters, makes this a discretionary use application. Planning Commission recommends concurrence on this one, but there is another step in the process to go forward, because the developer has some vacant use on the second floor, which they would like to use for office space, which would make it over and above the 1,000 square meters. That developer has agreed to the constraint not to allow that to happen right now. We had a long discussion of what that would mean for his development, and there is some risk for him to be agreeing to this, because as you'll see, the report is actually recommends concurrence. So therefore, the developer has agreed to the development itself. City Council and Planning Commission had requested that every year for the next 5 years we would have a review of the new office policy as it relates for downtown. And the purpose of that was to see whether it works or not, whether there are other pressures and other concerns and other points of departure we may have for the development as we go forward. So this may be one of those points to have discussion on later next year. So a developer who has not started the project obviously will be wanting to have a discussion of what that means for his project next year into 2013. So the report before us tonight is approval of what you see here, but we will be seeing likely another report coming to Planning Commission and Council about how office space can be developed within his property. And it may or may not be part of the under the current policy. There may be a change to that. That's for another council to decide. But the developer has agreed to move forward with this process. And on that condition, Planning Commission recommends concurrence.
Thank you, Councillor Fougere. Councillor Clipsham.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. This is one of several Planning Commission items on the agenda tonight, and if you'll allow me, I was in discussion with somebody the other day, and they were saying, well, why don't you guys take a break during July and August and like Parliament and like the legislature? And I said, I suspect it has something to do with the fact that we're constantly receiving development applications and which require council approval, and either through the clerk or the solicitor. Is that the reason that we have meetings so often? Is that a primary reason, perhaps? I'd ask the city manager, but he doesn't have a tie on. So.
Councillor Clipsham, I could give you some information on that.
Actually, why don't we have the solicitor, and then we'll turn it over to Councillor Stewart.
Well, Your Worship, under the Planning and Development Act, the approval process is fairly prescribed. Council does have some authority for some of the applications to delegate those approvals to the administrative level. But as a policy choice, Council has chosen to retain approval authority for much of that. So that's why a number of these applications come forward to Council for consideration.
And the frequency that no pause?
Councilor, I might be able to answer just to say that there are obviously a large number of applications coming forward, and Planning Commission has agreed over the last 2 months to have 3 additional meetings of Planning Commission to deal with the applications. We don't slow down because this is the market, the public sector saying the private sector they want to develop. So we've had 3 additional ones over the last 2 months.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion on report 127. Call for the question. All those in favor? Against? That's carried. It's received and filed, I believe, on IR 12-12.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's bring before you IR 1212, which is the semi-annual review of the closed executive committee items, and I move concurrence.
Thank you. Discussion? All in favor? Against? That is carried.
And Your Worship, the bylaws.
We have a couple of bylaws.
Yes. So I move, seconded by Councillor Zarka, that bylaws 2012-72 and 73 be introduced and read a first time.
All those in favor? Against? That's carried.
I move, seconded by Councillor Brown, that bylaws 2012-72 and 73 be read a second time.
Discussion? Call for the question. All those in favor? Against? That's carried.
I move, seconded by Councillor Clipshin, that Council hereby consent to bylaws 2012-72 and 73 going to a third reading at this meeting.
All those in favor? Against? That's carried.
And I move, seconded by Councillor Fougere, that bylaws 2012-72 and 3 be read a third time.
All those in favor? Against? That's carried. And there's an inquiry. Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Your Worship. I believe our rules allow the mover of an inquiry to simply read the inquiry, and I will do that. The nature of this inquiry relates to the administration's plans for Grant Drive. Could the administration please provide a response as to what the plans are to fix Grant Drive? Specifically, could the administration please include in their answer the following? Number 1, will there be options for the residents of Grant Drive to consider? Number 2, how will any such options be communicated to the residents of Grant Drive? And number 3, what is the timing of the administration's plans? Respectfully submitted. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. There's no question on this one. It's just simply lodged. Motion for adjournment. Seconder. Thank you. All in favor? Against? Carried. Have a good evening, everyone.